The sky turned an unnatural shade of green as Maeve Donovan clutched her kitchen counter, knuckles white against the worn laminate. The roar outside grew louder than any freight train, drowning out even the frantic beating of her heart. Windows rattled in their frames as if possessed by spirits desperate to break free. She'd seen twisters before. This was South Dakota after all, but never one that made the air itself feel heavy, electric, alive with malevolence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Just hold, she whispered to the walls of her grandmother's farmhouse, the only home she'd known since moving back after her divorce 3 years ago. Just hold a little longer. The radio crackled with static before the emergency broadcast. Cut through. Tornado on the ground, moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. Seek shelter immediately. Repeat, seek shelter. Gas. Maeve grabbed her emergency kit and stumbled toward the cellar door. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong amidst the chaos. A cry, human, young, coming from outside. Her hand froze on the cellar door handle. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, huddled against her porch steps, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. His long black hair whipped wildly in the wind, his copper skin streaked with rain and mud. His eyes, when they met hers, held equal measures of pain and defiance. Time seemed suspended as Maeve stood in her doorway, the wind tearing at her clothes, debris flying past like missiles. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat to the cellar, to think of her own survival. The nearest neighbors were miles away, the nearest reservation even further. Where had he come from? How had he gotten here? None of that mattered now. "Come on," she shouted above the roar, rushing forward. The boy flinched when she reached for him, but she didn't hesitate. "I won't hurt you, but that will." She pointed to the funnel cloud descending from the sky less than a mile away, a writhing column of destruction cutting across the prairie. Understanding flashed in his eyes. He nodded once, then grimaced as Maeve helped him stand. He was surprisingly light in her arms, all sinew and bone, but he bit back any sound of pain as she half-carried him inside. They had seconds, not minutes. The cellar door protested as she yanked it open, hinges shrieking from disuse. She practically lifted the boy down the narrow stairs, the darkness swallowing them whole as she kicked the door shut above them. The padlock, her grandmother's old superstition about keeping the devil out, now seemed like providence as she secured it from the inside. The world above exploded. Maeve curled her body around the boy as the house above them groaned like a dying animal. Dust rained from the ceiling beams. Mason jars rattled on ancient shelves. A terrible pressure built in her ears until she thought her skull might crack. The boy trembled against her, his breathing quick and shallow, but he made no sound. Not one. "It's all right," she lied, her mouth close to his ear. "It'll pass. I'm Maeve. What's your name?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly, she almost missed it beneath the cacophony above. "Dakota. Dakota," she repeated, the unfamiliar name strange on her tongue. "It means friend, doesn't it?" His eyes widened slightly in the dim light filtering through the cellar's single dirty window. He gave a small nod. "Well, Dakota, I think we—" The rest of her words were lost as something massive crashed above them. The entire structure shuddered. A support beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Maeve threw herself over Dakota as part of the ceiling gave way, raining splinters and debris. Pain bloomed across her back, sharp and sudden, but she didn't let go. For what seemed like hours but could only have been minutes, the tornado raged. Maeve whispered meaningless reassurances, stories from her childhood, anything to drown out the destruction. Dakota remained silent, his small hand eventually finding hers in the darkness, gripping with surprising strength. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the roaring stopped. The silence that followed felt unnatural, oppressive in its totality. Maeve's ears rang in the absence of sound. Slowly, cautiously, she uncurled from around Dakota. "Are you hurt?" she asked, running her hands over his arms, his shoulders, checking for fresh injuries. He shook his head, then looked pointedly at her. Blood stained her sleeve where a piece of wood had sliced through to her shoulder. "It's nothing," she said, although it stung fiercely. "Let's see about that leg of yours, then we'll figure out what's left up there." The boy's leg wasn't broken, thank goodness, but badly sprained. Using the first aid kit from her emergency supplies, Maeve cleaned and wrapped it as best she could. Dakota watched her work with wary eyes. "Where's your family?" she asked, securing the bandage. "Were you traveling? Did you get separated in the storm?" Dakota's gaze dropped to his hands. "Horse spooked. Threw me. Others went ahead to shelter." His English was perfect, but halting, as if each word cost him something to share. "Which direction?" Maeve asked, but the boy only shrugged, a gesture so universal in its teenage vagueness that it almost made her smile despite everything. "We'll find them," she promised. "But first, we need to see what we're dealing with up there." What they were dealing with, as it turned out, was devastation. The farmhouse still stood, but barely. The entire west wall had been torn away, exposing the interior to the elements like a grotesque dollhouse. The roof remained over only half the structure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Windows were shattered, furniture scattered across what had once been her grandmother's prized rose garden. The massive oak tree that had stood sentinel over the property for generations now lay across what remained of the driveway, its roots reaching skyward like gnarled fingers. Maeve stood in what had been her kitchen, the linoleum floor slick with rain, and fought back the urge to crumple. Everything she owned was here, everything she had left. A small pressure against her hand brought her back. Dakota stood beside her, his weight balanced on his good leg, his face impassive save for the concern in his eyes. "We should go," he said softly. Maeve blinked. "Go where?" "Not safe here, structure unstable." He was right, of course. Even now, the remaining walls creaked ominously in the aftermath winds, but the nearest town was 15 miles away, and her truck, she spotted it across the yard, flipped onto its side against the remains of the barn. "Got supplies?" Dakota asked. Breaking into her thoughts, Maeve nodded slowly. "In the cellar, food, water, first aid. Some camping gear from when I used to..." She stopped herself. "Yes, we have supplies. Then we make camp," he said with the conviction of someone much older than his years. "Away from buildings, until help comes. Until we find your people," Maeve corrected gently. Something flickered across Dakota's face, doubt perhaps or worry, but he nodded. They spent the next hour salvaging what they could. Maeve found her emergency radio, mercifully still functional. The broadcast confirmed what she already knew. The tornado had carved a path of destruction across 3 counties. Emergency services were stretched thin. It could be days before help reached outlying properties like hers. As dusk approached, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods that had somehow survived the storm's fury. Using a tarp salvaged from the barn and branches gathered by Dakota, who insisted on helping despite his injury, Maeve constructed a makeshift shelter. She built a small fire more for comfort than warmth. The early June air was still mild even after the storm. They ate in silence, canned beans, stale crackers, and beef jerky from her emergency supplies. Dakota accepted the food with solemn thanks, eating methodically, wasting nothing. When he finished, He stared into the fire, its light dancing across. "Features too serious for someone so young." "Your family," Maeve said carefully. "They'll be looking for you." "Yes." "Will they come this way, do you think?" Dakota considered this, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Maybe, when they can." There was something he wasn't saying. Maeve was certain. Something about why he'd been alone on the prairie during a tornado warning. Something about the family. He seemed reluctant to discuss. "You're from the reservation?" she asked instead, keeping her tone conversational. He nodded. "Pine Ridge." Maeve frowned. Pine Ridge was nearly 100 miles away. "That's quite a journey. Were you visiting someone?" Dakota's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Journey of necessity." Before she could ask what that meant, he shifted subjects. "You're home. Been there long?" "All my life, in a way," Maeve said, allowing the deflection. "It was my grandmother's. I grew up visiting every summer, moved back permanently 3 years ago after my divorce." "No children?" The question, so direct, caught her off guard. "No," she said, the familiar ache blooming in her chest. It wasn't meant to be." Dakota nodded as if this explained something important. They lapsed into silence again, the crackle of the fire and the distant calls of nightbirds the only sounds. Maeve thought the boy might have drifted to sleep when he spoke again, his voice so soft she had to lean forward to hear. "My grandfather says the winds bring change, good and bad." Maeve thought of her destroyed home, of this strange boy deposited on her doorstep by those same winds. "Your grandfather sounds wise." "Wakan Wichasha," Dakota said, a note of pride entering his voice for the first time. "Holy man. He walks between worlds." "And what does he think of modern medicine?" Maeve asked, nodding toward his bandaged leg. "That needs proper attention, you know. In the morning we should try to reach town." Dakota didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into a pouch at his waist, one Maeve hadn't noticed before, and pulled out something small and wrapped in leather. He offered it to her with both hands. Hesitantly, Maeve accepted it. The bundle was lighter than she expected, the leather soft with age and use. She glanced at Dakota, who nodded encouragement. Carefully, she unwrapped it to find a small carving of a bird in flight, made from what appeared to be whalebone or antler, worn smooth by countless hands. "Zitkala," Dakota said. "Bird, for protection. My grandfather gave it to me when I left." "It's beautiful," Maeve said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "But I can't accept this. It's yours." "For now, it's yours," Dakota insisted. "Until we part ways, for your kindness." Something in his certainty stopped her protest. She rewrapped the carving and tucked it carefully into her pocket. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe." Dakota nodded once, satisfied, then settled back against his bedroll. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, the lines of worry smoothing from his young face. Maeve stayed awake much longer, watching the stars emerge above the tattered remains of her world, feeling the weight of the carving in her pocket. There was more to Dakota's story than he was sharing, that much was clear, but for tonight they were both alive. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. She couldn't have known just how significant those challenges would be. Morning brought a clarity that was almost cruel in its beauty. The sky stretched impossibly blue above them. No trace of yesterday's violent green. Birds sang as if nothing had happened. Nature, Maeve thought, was both miraculous and heartless in its resilience. Dakota's leg was worse. The swelling had increased overnight, and he winced despite his best efforts to hide it when Maeve helped him stand. The route to town would be difficult under the best circumstances. With roads likely blocked by debris and no vehicle, it would be nearly impossible with his injury. "We need to get you to a doctor," Maeve said, redressing the swollen ankle. with the last of her clean bandages. No. The firmness in Dakota's voice surprised her. No doctors. Dakota, this isn't just a sprain. It could be fractured. Without proper treatment, my people will come, he interrupted, with such certainty that Maeve paused. Tomorrow, maybe. Next day, for sure. How can you be so confident? Do they know where you are? Dakota tapped his chest. They know. Maeve sighed, recognizing the stubbornness in his set jaw. Pushing would only make him retreat further. All right, one more day. But if they haven't come by tomorrow afternoon, we're finding a way to town. Deal? After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Deal. They spent the day making improvements to their camp. Maeve returned to the remains of the farmhouse, cautiously. Retrieving more supplies, blankets, clothing, additional food. She found her old hand-crank radio and brought it back, though the news it delivered was grim. Power outages across the region, roads impassable in many areas, emergency services. Working around the clock, Dakota, despite her protests, insisted on contributing. He showed her how to set snares using twine from her sewing kit and branches he'd fashioned into triggers. By afternoon, they'd caught 2 rabbits. Maeve cleaned them while Dakota built a more efficient cooking fire, explaining the technique his grandfather had taught him for maximizing heat while minimizing smoke. As they worked, Dakota gradually opened up, sharing fragments of his life on the reservation. The grandmother who had taught him to bead, the school where he excelled at mathematics but struggled with history. They tell it wrong, he said simply. The younger sisters he clearly adored. Yet he remained evasive about why he'd been traveling so far from home, and about the grandfather he mentioned with such reverence. Evening found them with a heartier meal than the night before. Rabbit stew made with wild onions and the few salvageable vegetables from Maeve's garden. As they ate, Maeve found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years. Her grandmother teaching her to quilt, summers spent exploring the prairie, the brief, failed marriage she'd left behind in Minneapolis. Why did you come back here? Dakota asked, scraping the last of the stew from his bowl. After husband left. He didn't leave. I did, Maeve corrected gently. And I came back because... She paused, considering. Because this land has been in my family for generations. Because even with its hardships, it's the only place that ever felt like home. Because starting over is easier when you begin from somewhere you know. Dakota nodded as if this made perfect sense. Land remembers us, holds our stories. Yes, Maeve said, surprised at how precisely he'd captured what she'd always felt, but never articulated. That's exactly it. The boy's eyes drifted to the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Your land has old stories, before your grandmother, before her grandmother. Something in his tone raised the fine hairs on Maeve's arms. What do you mean? This was Lakota land, long time ago. His gaze returned to her, measuring. You didn't know. Maeve shifted uncomfortably. I knew this was all tribal territory once, but it's been in my family since the 1890s. My great-great-grandfather was one of the first homesteaders after. As she trailed off, suddenly aware of how this must sound to him. After they took it from us, Dakota finished, not accusingly but matter-of-factly. After the massacres. Maeve had no response. The history of the region wasn't something she dwelled on. It had always seemed distant, academic. But sitting across from Dakota, it became immediate, personal in a way textbooks had never conveyed. I'm sorry, she said finally, knowing how inadequate the words were. Dakota studied her for a long moment, then surprised her with a small smile. Not your doing. Past is past, but not forgotten. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, the weight of history settling between them like another presence. Finally, Dakota spoke again. My grandfather says reconciliation begins with acknowledgement, truth before healing. Your grandfather, Maeve said carefully. Sounds like someone I'd like to meet. Dakota's smile widened, transforming his serious face. Soon, he said cryptically, then winced as he shifted his injured leg. Maeve noticed immediately. Let me see that again. Despite Dakota's protests, she insisted on checking his injury. The swelling hadn't improved, and now a concerning warmth radiated from the skin around his ankle. Infection was setting in. That's it, she said firmly. First thing tomorrow, we're finding a way to town. I respect your traditions, Dakota, but this needs antibiotics, not just herbs and good intentions. He looked as if he might argue, then surprised her by nodding. Tomorrow morning. But he glanced westward toward the reservation. Give them until noon, please. Something in his eyes, a certainty beyond his years, made Maeve relent. Noon, not a minute later. That night, Dakota's sleep was restless, punctuated by brief periods of feverish murmuring in Lakota. Maeve kept the fire burning, applying cold compresses to his forehead and ankle throughout the night. By dawn, she'd made up her mind. They couldn't wait until noon. They needed to leave as soon as there was enough light. She was gathering their meager belongings when Dakota woke, his eyes clearer than she'd expected. They're coming, he said without preamble. Maeve paused in her packing. Who's coming? My grandfather, others. He pushed himself up on his elbows, grimacing but determined. Today. Dakota, you're running a fever. How could they possibly know where to find you? Zitkala, he said, pointing to the carving. She still carried in her pocket. Not just protection, connection. Maeve frowned, confused. The carving? What does it have to do with sacred object? Dakota interrupted. My grandfather tracks it, knows where I am. Maeve's rational mind wanted to dismiss this as fever talk, but something, perhaps the absolute conviction in Dakota's voice, gave her pause. Even if that were true, we can't just wait around hoping they'll appear. Your leg needs medical attention now. Few more hours, Dakota pleaded. Please trust me. Those two words, trust me, hung in the air between them. Maeve had spent 3 years rebuilding her life alone, learning to trust her own judgment after her ex-husband had systematically undermined it. Now this boy, this stranger from a culture she barely understood, was asking for her trust based on beliefs she couldn't rationalize. Yet hadn't he already proven himself? His knowledge of survival, his resourcefulness despite his injury, his quiet dignity in the face of pain, all spoke to a maturity beyond his years. Noon, she said finally, just like we agreed, not a minute later. Relief washed over Dakota's features. Thank you. The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Maeve kept Dakota comfortable, encouraging him to drink water and applying fresh compresses to his ankle and forehead. His fever seemed to stabilize rather than worsen, which she took as a positive sign. Still, every time she checked her watch, she found herself calculating how long it would take to reach town if they left immediately, what alternative routes they might take if the main road was blocked. By 11, she was pacing the perimeter of their camp, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. There was nothing but the gentle swaying of prairie grass, the occasional flutter of birds startled from their rest. Dakota, she said gently, returning to his side. It's almost noon. I think we need to listen, he interrupted, his head tilted slightly. You hear? Maeve fell silent, straining her ears. At first there was nothing but the whisper of wind through grass. Then, faintly, a sound that didn't belong, a rhythmic thudding like distant drum beats. No, she realized with widening eyes. Not drums, hoofbeats. They came from the west, appearing first as a dust cloud on the horizon, then resolving into distinct shapes as they drew closer. Horses, dozens of them, moving with purpose across the prairie. Bareback riders guided them, with fluid movements that spoke of lifelong familiarity, their dark hair streaming behind them like banners. Dakota pulled himself up, pain forgotten, as his face split into a grin of pure joy. "Grandfather," he breathed, pointing to the figure at the head of the approaching riders. Maeve stood transfixed as the horsemen approached. There were at least 70 of them, she estimated in disbelief. Men and a few women, dressed in a mix of traditional and modern clothing. Their faces were solemn, eyes scanning the landscape until they found Dakota. The leader raised his hand, and the entire group came to a synchronized halt about 50 yards. From the camp, he was an imposing figure, tall and straight-backed, despite his obvious age, mid-70s at least, his face deeply lined like weathered cedar, his silver-streaked hair falling past his shoulders. He wore a simple denim shirt and jeans, but around his neck hung elaborate beadwork that caught the sunlight. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the old man dismounted with surprising grace, handed his reins to a younger rider, and approached, alone. His eyes, so like Dakota's, never left Maeve's face. She fought the urge to step back. There was no hostility in his gaze, but its intensity was unsettling, as if he could see through her to some truth she herself couldn't access. When he reached them, he first turned to Dakota, placing a weathered hand on the boy's head. They exchanged words in Lakota, too soft and quick for Maeve to catch, even if she could have understood them. Dakota nodded several times, gesturing once to his injured leg, and then, to Maeve's surprise, toward her. Only then did the old man fully turn his attention to her. Up close, his presence was even more commanding. He studied her with eyes that had witnessed decades of history, his expression unreadable. "You sheltered him," he said finally, his voice, deep and measured, tended his wounds, shared your fire. It wasn't a question, but Maeve found herself answering anyway. Yes, he was hurt. Anyone would have— "No!" the old man interrupted, shaking his head slowly. "Not anyone. Not in these times. Not with our history." He reached out, and Maeve was startled to find his hand extended toward her, palm up. Instinctively, she placed her hand in his. His skin was dry and warm, calloused from a lifetime of work. "I'm Daniel Running Elk," he said, "Dakota's grandfather. The boy you saved is my youngest grandchild, my Topa, my heart." "He's a remarkable young man," Maeve said, finding her voice. "But he needs medical attention. His ankle will be tended to," Daniel assured her. "We have a healer with us and access to your medicine when needed." He released her hand and turned slightly, gesturing to the mounted warriors waiting at a respectful distance. "We have come not just for Dakota, but for you." "For me?" Maeve repeated, confusion washing over her. "I don't understand." "Daniel." Running Elk's weathered face softened into something resembling a smile. "No home," he said, nodding toward the remains of her farmhouse visible in the distance. "No family nearby. Storm has destroyed much." "Yes, but I'll rebuild. I'll manage." "Of course you will," he acknowledged with a slight incline of his head. "You are strong, but no one should rebuild alone." Before Maeve could process his words, he turned and raised his hand. At the signal, the riders dismounted as one and began approaching, leading their horses. There was purpose in their movements, organization in what at first appeared to be chaos. "What's happening?" Maeve asked, a hint of alarm creeping into her voice. It was Dakota who answered, his face alight with a joy she hadn't seen before. "They've come to help. To rebuild. It's our way." "But why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Daniel Running Elk studied her again, his gaze softening. "When you took in my grandson, you didn't ask who he was. You didn't calculate what was owed. You acted from the heart." He gestured expansively at the riders, now arranging themselves in what Maeve recognized as work parties. This is our response, from our hearts. I can't possibly accept. You already have, he said simply, ending her protest. By accepting Dakota, you accepted all of us. This land, he continued, his voice taking on a deeper resonance, once belonged to my ancestors. Now it belongs to you, but perhaps in helping each other, we can both belong to it. Maeve felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. 3 years of solitude, of rebuilding her life piece by careful peace, of telling herself she needed no one, all crumbled in the face of this man's simple wisdom. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the riders, 70 strong, just as Dakota had somehow known they would be, set up camp around the remains of Maeve's farmhouse. They brought supplies, food, water, medicine, tools. 4 men, with medical training, tended to Dakota's ankle, while others assessed the damage to the structure, salvaging what could be saved, making plans for what needed to be rebuilt. Daniel Running Elk stayed beside Maeve as she watched in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the efficiency and purpose with which these strangers, these people she would have passed without recognition on the street just days ago, worked to restore what the tornado had destroyed. Why 70? She asked finally, the question that had been nagging at her. Why so many? The old man's eyes crinkled at the corners. 7 is a sacred number to us. 10 times 7. Completion. Wholeness. Also, he added with unexpected humor, we have many young men with too much energy. Better they use it for building than mischief. Maeve found herself laughing. A real laugh, the first since the storm, and the sound seemed to please him. As dusk settled over the prairie, transforming the sky into a canvas of indigo and gold, fires were lit around the property. Someone produced drums, and soon the rhythm that had first announced their arrival became a heartbeat for the makeshift community that had sprung up around her destroyed home. Daniel guided Maeve to a place of honor near the central fire, where Dakota already sat, his leg properly bandaged, color returning to his face. The boy reached for her hand as she settled beside him. I told you they would come, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Maeve acknowledged, squeezing his fingers gently. You did. Food appeared. Stew rich with vegetables and buffalo meat, fry bread still warm from cooking, berries preserved from last season's harvest. As they ate, Daniel explained what would happen in the coming days. The rebuilding of her home, stronger than before. The restoration of her garden, the mending of fences and clearing of fields. But why? Maeve asked again, still unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of their generosity. Why go to such lengths for a stranger? Daniel Running Elk's gaze traveled around the circle of fires, taking in his people, their faces animated in conversation, their hands busy with work even now, braiding rope, repairing tools, preparing for tomorrow's labor. 4 days ago, he began, his voice dropping to a register that drew everyone near him into stillness. Dakota came to me with a dream of wind that destroys and rebuilds, a dream of a woman with hair like autumn leaves who would shelter him in storm, a woman whose kindness would bridge what history has divided. Maeve felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. I sent him on Hanbleshea. Vision quest, Daniel continued. Not alone. Others followed at distance for safety. But storm came faster than expected, separated him from watchers. His eyes, when they met hers, held an emotion she couldn't name. Or perhaps Creator had different plan, led him exactly where he needed to be. To my doorstep, Maeve whispered. Daniel nodded. To your doorstep. To your heart, and you opened both. Around them the drums grew louder, more insistent. Voices joined in, singing in Lakota, the words unfamiliar but the sentiment somehow clear to Maeve's heart. Gratitude, community, rebirth. Long ago, Daniel, said, his voice barely audible above the music. This land knew no boundaries, no yours and mine, only ours. Perhaps in small ways, we can remember that wisdom. As night fully claimed the sky, Maeve looked around at the people who had come, 70 strong, to help a woman they'd never met because she had helped one of their own. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her that true wealth lay not in what you possessed, but in what you gave. She thought of the lonely years since her divorce, the walls she'd built around her heart as surely as those around her property. The tornado had torn down those physical walls, and now these unexpected allies were helping her rebuild something stronger in their place. Perhaps it was time to let the other walls fall too. Daniel Running Elk seemed to read her thoughts. Storms destroy, he said quietly, but also clear path for new growth. You will rebuild, not same as before, better. Dakota, drowsy now from medicine and food, leaned against her shoulder. Told you, he murmured sleepily. Winds bring change, good and bad. Maeve looked up at the stars emerging above them, the same stars her ancestors and Daniel's had gazed upon from this very land, though with very different eyes. The same land that had sustained generations of both their families through different means, but with the same reverence. Yes, she said, finally understanding. They certainly do. And as the 70 riders' songs rose to meet the night sky, Maeve Donovan felt something long dormant stirring within her, the recognition that home wasn't just a structure to be rebuilt, but a circle to be widened. A circle that now, improbably but undeniably, included them all. Dawn broke over the prairie with gentle persistence, painting the horizon in watercolor shades of amber and rose. Maeve stirred from her makeshift bed, momentarily disoriented by the sounds surrounding her. The quiet murmur of unfamiliar voices, the rhythmic chopping of wood, the occasional whinny of horses. Reality flooded back as she sat up. The tornado, Dakota, and the arrival of 70 Lakota riders led by Daniel Running Elk. She pushed aside the thick buffalo hide that had covered her through the night, a gift from one of the women who had introduced herself simply as Sarah, her silver-streaked hair braided elaborately down her back, her hands quick and sure as she had helped arrange sleeping quarters for everyone. The previous evening felt dreamlike in the cold light of morning, yet the evidence was undeniable. The camp bustled with activity despite the early hour. Fires already burned, coffee percolated in large pots, and work parties organized themselves with practiced efficiency. Maeve ran a hand through her tangled copper hair, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She had always prided herself on self-sufficiency, on never needing to appear vulnerable. Now she felt exposed, unmoored by the unexpected kindness of strangers. Coffee. She looked up to find a young man standing before her, perhaps 20 or so, offering a steaming tin. Cup. His smile was tentative but genuine, his eyes, so similar to Dakota's, warm with shy welcome. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was strong and sweet, nothing like the weak brew she usually made for herself. It spread warmth through her limbs, chasing away the morning chill. "I'm Joseph," the young man said, "Dakota's cousin. Uncle Daniel asked me to tell you breakfast is ready when you are." He gestured toward the central fire, where several women worked around a makeshift cooking area. "How is Dakota this morning?" Maeve asked, suddenly anxious about the boy. Joseph's smile widened. "Better." The medicine man, Maka, treated his ankle with herbs and your bandages. "The swelling is down. He's been asking for you." Relief washed over her. "I'll see him right after I've made myself presentable." Joseph nodded politely and retreated, giving her privacy. Maeve quickly used water from a basin someone had thoughtfully left nearby to wash her face and hands, combed her hair with her fingers, and straightened her clothing as best she could. Only then did she make her way toward the central fire. The transformation of her property in just a few hours was astonishing. The debris that had been scattered across the yard was now organized into neat piles, salvageable lumber here, broken. Furniture there, personal belongings carefully gathered and protected from the elements under tarps. A team of men was already working on the remains of her house, reinforcing what could be saved, dismantling what couldn't. Women moved between workstations, some cooking, others sorting through recovered items, still others preparing materials needed for the rebuilding. Children, Maeve hadn't even noticed their arrival the previous evening, darted between the adults, carrying messages, fetching tools, or simply playing in the newfound community that had sprung up overnight. Dogs too had appeared, following their owners from the reservation, now lounging in patches of sunlight or trailing hopefully after anyone handling food. It was like watching a small village materialize from nothing, operating with the smooth coordination that comes from generations of shared purpose. "You slept well?" Maeve turned to find Daniel running elk beside her, his presence as commanding in daylight as it had been in the gathering dusk. He wore the same simple clothes as she does yesterday, but his long, silver-streaked hair was freshly braided, decorated with a single eagle feather. "Better than I have in days," she admitted. "Your people are remarkable." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Not my people, our people, all related under the sky." Before Maeve could respond to this gentle correction, he gestured toward a young woman approaching them, carrying a plate heaped with food. "Eat," he said simply, "then we talk." The breakfast was unlike anything Maeve typically prepared for herself. Thick slices of fry bread topped with berries and honey, eggs scrambled with wild onions and some herb she couldn't identify, meat that she suspected was buffalo, rich and flavorful. She ate seated on a log pulled up beside the fire, acutely aware of the activity swirling around her, yet no one rushed her or made her feel self-conscious about being served while they worked. Dakota found her as she finished the last bites of food. He moved with the aid of a handcrafted crutch, his injured leg still bandaged but bearing enough weight to allow him mobility. His face, which had seemed so guarded when they first met, now split into a wide grin at the sight of her. "You're walking!" Maeve exclaimed, setting aside her plate. "Maka's medicine," Dakota said, lowering himself carefully onto the log beside her. "Grandfather says I will dance again by moons." "And Maeve studied him, noting the healthy color in his cheeks, the brightness in his eyes. Whether it was the herbal treatments, the proper medical supplies, or simply the presence of his people, Dakota was healing rapidly. "I'm glad," she said sincerely. "How does it feel, having everyone here?" Dakota's gaze traveled across the busy camp, resting briefly on his grandfather, speaking with a group of men near what remained of the farmhouse. "Like it should be," he said after a moment. "Connected." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond its syllables. Connected. Exactly what Maeve had not been for 3 long years, despite her protestations of self-sufficiency. A woman appeared beside them, older than Maeve but not elderly. Her round face creased with smile lines, her practical clothes adorned with intricate beadwork at the collar and cuffs. She said something to Dakota in Lakota that made him duck his head in embarrassment. "This is my grandmother, Wachiwi," Dakota introduced, switching to English. "She says I was careless with my ankle, but lucky in my rescuer." "Wachiwi," Maeve repeated, liking the way the name felt on her tongue. "It's an honor to meet you." The older woman studied Maeve with keen eyes, then reached out to touch her copper hair with gentle fingers. "Like autumn leaves," she said, her English accented, but clear, "just as he dreamed." Maeve blinked, remembering Daniel's words from the previous night about Dakota's vision of a woman with hair like autumn leaves. "You believe in his dreams?" Wachiwi's smile deepened. "Dreams are messengers when we know how to listen." She glanced at her grandson with unmistakable pride. This one has always known how to listen. Grandmother, Dakota protested, his cheeks darkening. Wachiwi patted his shoulder affectionately. Truth is nothing to be shy about. She turned back to Maeve. You come now. Help us sort what can be saved from your home. Men think everything broken is useless. Women know better. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Maeve found herself working alongside Wachiwi and several other women, sifting through the possessions recovered from the wreckage of her home. Each item carried memories. Her grandmother's quilt, now torn but reparable. The collection of hand-thrown pottery she'd gathered over the years, some pieces miraculously intact. Photo albums warped by rain but still holding precious images. The women worked with her, not for her. They asked about each item, listened to the stories behind them, celebrated each small treasure reclaimed from the destruction. When Maeve's voice cracked while holding her grandmother's cracked teapot, the last gift before she died, Wachiwi simply placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, allowing her the dignity of her grief without trying to diminish it. Some things broken can be more beautiful in mending, the older woman said after Maeve had composed herself. Kintsugi, Japanese way, fill cracks with gold. Maeve looked at her in surprise. You know about kintsugi. Wachiwi's eyes crinkled with amusement. I lived in Japan 3 years, military husband long ago, before Daniel. She held up the teapot, examining the clean break in its spout. This can be fixed. Not the same, better maybe. Around midday, Joseph appeared again, this time with a message from Daniel. Grandfather asks if you would walk with him. He wants to show you the rebuilding plans. Maeve hesitated, glancing at the half-sorted pile of belongings. Wachiwi made a shooing motion with her hands. Go. We continue. Nothing lost. Daniel was waiting at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the prairie that stretched toward the horizon. The sun had burned away the morning mist, revealing a landscape transformed by the tornado's path. Trees uprooted, the earth itself scarred where the funnel had touched down. Yet already, Maeve could see tiny green shoots pushing through the churned soil, nature's persistent response to devastation. Walk with me, Daniel said, not a command, but an invitation. They moved away from the bustling camp, following a path that led toward a small rise where the land fell away to reveal a stream Maeve had always thought of as the boundary of her property. Daniel moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in his body despite his years, matching his pace to hers without any apparent effort. Your home, he said, after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. It was your grandmother's. Yes, Maeve replied. And her mother's before that. It's been in my family for 4 generations. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Deep roots. Not as deep as yours, Maeve said, before she could reconsider the words. If he was offended, he didn't show it. Time is measured differently by different peoples. 4 generations, 40, 400, all moments in the breath of creation. They reached the stream, its waters swollen from the recent storm, rushing over rocks with cheerful indifference to human concerns. Daniel stopped, watching the play of light on the surface. Before your family came, this was Sikangland, burnt thigh people, my mother's people. Before them, others. Land remembers all who walk upon it. Maeve wasn't sure how to respond. The complicated history between their peoples felt too vast to address with casual words. I've never thought much about who was here before, she admitted. That seems unforgivably ignorant now. Daniel's weathered face softened. Awareness is first step toward healing. You took it by opening your door to Dakota. Anyone would have... No, he interrupted with the same certainty Dakota had shown. Not anyone. Fear builds walls. You chose otherwise. They continued along the stream bank, Daniel occasionally stopping to point out plants, some medicinal, others edible, others significant in Lakota ceremonies. Maeve listened, absorbing the knowledge he shared freely, aware of the gift it represented. Eventually, they circled back toward the farm from the opposite direction, approaching the ruins of her barn from the north. A group of men had cleared away most of the debris, salvaging the heavy support beams that had survived the storm. "You're home," Daniel said, gesturing toward the hive of activity around the farmhouse. "Cannot be exactly as it was. Storm took too much, but it can be rebuilt stronger. We have brought lumber, tools, young men eager to show their skills." His eyes, when they met hers, held a question. "If you will accept." Maeve felt something catch in her throat. The magnitude of the offer, not just the materials or labor, but the community it represented, was overwhelming. "Why would you do this for me?" The truth. Daniel considered her for a long moment, his gaze steady. "Many reasons. Some practical. Our winter camp is not far. Having ally nearby is valuable. Some spiritual. Dakota's vision holds meaning for our people beyond simple rescue. Some historical. Healing old wounds requires action, not just words." He paused, his voice dropping slightly. "And some personal." "Personal?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My wife, Wachiwi. She says I spend too much time with ghosts of the past. Need to build bridges to future." He gestured expansively at the land around them. "This, helping you rebuild, is such a bridge." Maeve felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had spent so long convincing herself she needed no one, wanted no one. The isolation after her divorce had been a choice she had told herself, not a retreat, but an advance towards self-sufficiency. Now, faced with such generosity, such community, the walls she had built around her heart felt suddenly flimsy, inadequate protection against the flood of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "Say nothing," Daniel replied simply. "Do something instead. Help us help you." As they approached the farm, Maeve could see the transformation already taking place. The damaged sections of the house had been completely cleared away, leaving only the sturdy stone foundation and the portions of framework that could be salvaged. Men worked with practiced coordination, raising new support beams, their voices calling to each other in a mixture of Lakota and English. Dakota sat with a group of children, his injured leg extended carefully before him, teaching them how to braid cord from plant fibers. He looked up as Maeve and Daniel approached, his face brightening. "They're building a surprise for you," he called, gesturing toward a structure taking shape beside the house. "Grandfather won't tell even me what it is." Daniel's eyes crinkled. "At the corners. Some secrets must stay secret until ready to be known." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maeve found herself moving between tasks, sorting salvaged items with Wachiwi and the other women, helping prepare the evening meal, learning how to split shingles for the roof under the patient tutelage of an elderly man named Thomas, whose hands were gnarled with arthritis, but still remarkably deft with tools. As dusk approached, she realized with a start that she hadn't once worried about the future since morning. The weight of rebuilding alone, of facing winter in a damaged home, of somehow finding the resources to start over, all had been temporarily lifted by the sheer presence of these people who had appeared in her life as suddenly as the tornado itself. The evening meal was a community affair, with everyone gathering around the central fires. Food was shared, stories exchanged, laughter rippling through the gathering with increasing frequency as the initial reserve between Maeve and the Lakota diminished. Children played improvised games in the lengthening shadows, dogs sprawled contentedly at their owner's feet, and somewhere, someone began to play a flute. A haunting melody that seemed to rise and fall with the prairie wind. Maeve found herself seated between Wachiwi and a younger woman named Mika, who had spent the day showing remarkable skill in salvaging Maeve's water-damaged books. Across the fire, Daniel sat with the other elders, their faces grave one moment, animated the next as conversation flowed. "He will speak soon," Wachiwi murmured, following Maeve's gaze to Daniel. "Important words. Listen with heart, not just ears." Before Maeve could ask what she meant, Daniel rose, and a hush fell over the gathering. He spoke first in Lakota, his deep voice carrying easily through the evening air. Maeve couldn't understand the words, but their cadence, their weight, was unmistakable. This was more than casual conversation. It was ceremony. After several minutes, he switched to English, his eyes finding Maeve across the fire. "Long ago," he began, "before the coming of the Wasiku, the white man, our people followed the buffalo across these plains. We lived by their cycles, moved with the seasons, took only what was needed. Land was not owned, it was respected, honored as mother and provider." He paused, his gaze traveling over the assembled faces, all turned toward him with expressions of quiet attention. "When the Wasiku came, they brought different ways. They drew lines on paper, claimed land could be parceled and possessed. Our ancestors did not understand this thinking. How can you own what gives life? It would be like owning the air, the rain, the sunlight." Maeve felt a prickle of discomfort, acutely aware of her status as a landowner, as the descendant of those who had claimed these acres by right of paper, not relationship. "Many winters have passed," Daniel continued. "Much blood has soaked into this soil, some in battle, some in massacre, some in small daily cruelties that history does not record. The wounds are old, but not forgotten." The firelight played across, his face highlighting the deep lines carved by decades of joy and sorrow. "But wounds, even the deepest, can heal if tended properly. This woman," he gestured toward Maeve, "opened her door to one of our children, not because he was Lakota, but because he was human and in need. In doing so, she opened a way for healing that benefits us all." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. Maeve felt her cheeks warm with self-consciousness, but Wachiwi's hand on her arm kept her grounded. "Tomorrow we will raise the framework of her new home, not exactly as it was. The storm has changed the land, and so our response must change as well. We will build stronger, with knowledge both old and new. And in this building perhaps we build something else too. Understanding between peoples who have walked separate paths too long." His eyes, when they met Maeve's across the dancing flames, held a question. Whether she understood the deeper significance of what was happening here, whether she accepted not just the rebuilding of her home, but the responsibility that came with it. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. A smile ghosted across Daniel's face. "Good," he said simply, then resumed his seat. The gathering didn't disperse immediately. Instead, Thomas, the elderly craftsman who had taught Maeve about shingles, took out a drum and began a gentle rhythm. Others joined, some with drums of their own, others with rattles or simply by clapping. Women's voices rose in harmony, the words in Lakota, but the sentiment transcending language. Gratitude, community, hope. "Healing song," Wachiwi explained, seeing Maeve's questioning look. "For land, for people, for past and future." Maeve let the music wash over her, carrying away the last of her resistance. She had spent 3 years rebuilding her life alone, believing strength meant independence. Now she was being offered a different vision of strength, one rooted in connection, in mutual support, in the recognition that no one person could or should stand entirely alone. As the night deepened, the singing gradually gave way to quieter conversations. Children were tucked into bedrolls, the elderly retired to the shelters that had been constructed throughout the day, and the fires were banked to last through the night. Maeve found herself unexpectedly reluctant to seek her own rest, savoring the sense of community that had enveloped her so completely in just 24 hours. You should sleep, Dakota's voice came from behind her. Tomorrow is big day. He had approached silently, his injured leg apparently less of a hindrance as he grew used to the crutch. In the dim light of the banked fire, his young face looked older, more serious. So should you, Maeve countered, smiling. How's the ankle? Better. Marker says I'm lucky. No real damage, just strain and bruising. I'm glad. Dakota hesitated, then lowered himself carefully beside her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you okay with all this? He gestured around them at the sleeping camp. Grandfather sometimes forgets not everyone sees things as he does, if it's too much. The concern in his voice, the maturity of the question, from one so young, touched Maeve deeply. It's overwhelming, she admitted, but in a good way. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until suddenly I wasn't anymore. Dakota nodded slowly. After my parents died, car accident 3 years ago, I didn't want to connect either. Felt safer alone. Maeve's heart constricted at this glimpse into his loss, so casually revealed. I'm so sorry, Dakota. He shrugged with the forced nonchalance of youth covering pain. Grandfather says grief shared is grief halved, but you have to be willing to share it. The words hung between them, an invitation and a challenge. Maeve found herself considering her own carefully guarded grief, not just for her failed marriage, but for the children she had never been able to have, for the life she had imagined that had never materialized. Your grandfather is a wise man, she said finally. Dakota smiled, a flash of teeth in the darkness. Don't tell him that. His hat already doesn't fit. The unexpected humor startled a laugh from Maeve. Dakota's smile widened, and for a moment they were just a woman and a boy, sharing a joke beside a dying fire, all the weight of history and culture and circumstance momentarily lifted. You should come visit the reservation sometime, Dakota said after their laughter had faded. When your house is finished, see how we live. The casual invitation touched her. I'd like that. I've never been, though it's not that far. Many haven't. Easier to keep distance. Yes, Maeve agreed quietly. It is easier, but not better. Dakota studied her with those old young eyes. No, not better. He stifled a yawn, then grinned sheepishly. Grandmother will scold me if I don't rest the leg. Sleep well, Maeve. You too, Dakota. She watched him make his way carefully, back to where his grandparents' shelter stood, noted how several people stirred in their bedrolls as he passed, checking on him without being obvious about it. So much care, so much awareness of each individual within the larger community. When Maeve finally sought her own rest, wrapping herself in the buffalo hide that had been provided, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for longer than she cared to admit. The land around her, once simply property to be maintained, now felt alive with stories, both hers and those of the people whose ancestors had walked here long before her family arrived. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. Morning arrived, with the chorus of birdsong and the tantalizing aroma of coffee brewing. Maeve stirred, momentarily disoriented by the sounds of the camp already bustling with activity. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the eastern sky in delicate washes of pink and gold, yet already people moved with purpose, preparing for the day ahead. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair, and was surprised to find a bundle placed beside her bedroll. Wrapped in soft deer skin and tied with a simple leather cord, it hadn't been there when she'd gone to sleep. Curious, she untied the cord and unfolded the deerskin to reveal clothing, a simple dress of deep green cotton, leggings of soft buckskin, and moccasins adorned with subtle beadwork. A small wooden comb carved from a rich reddish wood lay atop. The clothing, along with a note written in elegant flowing script, for the raising of your home, clothes make the heart ready. Watchery tears sprang unexpectedly to Maeve's eyes. Such thoughtfulness from someone who had been a stranger just 2 days ago touched her deeply. The green of the dress would complement her copper hair and fair skin. Wachiwi had chosen with care, not just grabbed whatever was available. She dressed quickly, relishing the feel of the soft buckskin against her skin. The dress fit surprisingly well, its simple lines flattering without being revealing, its cut allowing for freedom of movement. The moccasins, too, fit as if made for her, though she knew that was impossible given the short time. When she emerged from her shelter, she found Wachiwi waiting nearby, a knowing smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "You look good," the older woman said simply. "Green is your color." "Thank you," Maeve replied, touching the soft fabric of the dress. "It's beautiful, but how did you know my size?" Wachiwi's smile deepened. Eyes see, hands remember. She reached out, adjusting the collar of the dress slightly. "My daughter was built like you, tall, strong shoulders." A shadow passed briefly across her face. "She walks in spirit world now. These were hers." Maeve's throat tightened. "I'm honored." "Truly, but if they're hers, she would be pleased," Wachiwi interrupted gently. "Things should be used, not hidden away in memory boxes. Life continues." She took Maeve's arm. "Come, eat. Today, we raise the bones of your new home." Breakfast was a communal affair, with everyone gathering around the central fires. The meal was simple but hearty: corn porridge sweetened with honey, dried fruit reconstituted in hot water, strong coffee for the adults, and tea for the children. Maeve found herself seated between Dakota and Joseph, the latter explaining the day's building. Plans with infectious enthusiasm. "The foundation is solid," he told her, gesturing with his spoon toward the cleared area where her house had stood. "Stone doesn't yield easily to wind. We'll use that strength, add our own. By sunset, you'll see the shape of your new home." "I don't know how to thank you all," Maeve said, the words feeling inadequate against the reality of such generosity. Joseph's smile was genuine but puzzled. "No thanks needed. It's what communities do." "But we're not." Maeve hesitated, unsure how to express the thought without sounding ungrateful. "Not the same community?" Joseph finished for her. "Maybe not yesterday. Today, different story." He shrugged, the gesture reminiscent of his younger cousin. "Grandfather says boundaries between people are human inventions. Nature recognizes no such lines." Before Maeve could respond, a call went up from the direction of the building site. Joseph finished his coffee in one quick gulp and stood. "Time to begin. You'll see by nightfall the bones will stand." The day unfolded with the brisk efficiency Maeve was coming to associate with the Lakota. Work parties formed organically, each focused on a specific aspect of the rebuilding. The strongest young men, including Joseph, were assigned to raising the heavy support beams that would form the framework of the new house. Others prepared lumber, cutting and shaping pieces according to plans that seemed to exist primarily in the builders' minds rather than on paper. Women worked alongside men in many tasks, though they also maintained their own crucial activities, preparing food for the workers, caring for the smallest children, continuing the sorting and salvaging of Maeve's possessions. Elderly members of the community sat in the shade, their hands busy with smaller tasks, whittling tool handles, braiding cordage, piecing together items that could be repaired. Maeve found herself moving between groups, offering help where she could, learning new skills, absorbing the rhythms of communal work. Nobody treated her as an outsider or a charity case. She was simply another pair of hands in the collective effort, albeit one who received special care as the one whose home was being rebuilt. Midday brought a brief respite as food was distributed among the workers. Maeve found a patch of shade beneath one of the few trees that had survived the tornado and sank down gratefully, accepting a plate from Mika, who had continued to show particular interest in salvaging Maeve's books. "We're drying the pages carefully," Mika told her, settling nearby with her own meal. Many can be saved, though some are too far gone. The covers too. Leather can be restored with proper treatment. You know a lot about book preservation, Maeve observed. Mika smiled, a quick flash of teeth. University training. Before returning to the reservation, I was a conservation specialist at a museum in Denver. Maeve blinked in surprise. Really? What made you come back? Family. Community. Mika's gaze traveled over the busy scene before them. There's knowledge here that no university teaches. Wisdom no museum preserves, except as artifacts behind glass. I needed both worlds. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main building site. Maeve looked up to see the first of the massive ridge beams being raised into position, a dozen men working in coordinated effort while Daniel called directions. The beam, hewn from a single massive pine, slowly rose into place, guided by ropes and the collective strength of the workers. A cheer went up as it settled into the precisely cut notches prepared for it. Joseph, perched precariously atop the structure, secured it with wooden pegs pounded into pre-drilled holes. Even from a distance, Maeve could see the pride in his face as he completed the task and raised a hand in triumph. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, the framework of Maeve's new home took shape with astonishing speed. What had been merely foundation and scattered lumber that morning now stood as a skeleton of sturdy beams reaching toward the sky, more substantial and somehow more organic than the house that had stood there before. The workers moved with the practiced coordination of those accustomed to communal effort, each person knowing their role without needing constant direction. Maeve found herself working alongside a woman named a Pony, whose strong hands and quiet efficiency belied her 70 years. They were creating insulation panels from a mixture of straw, clay, and water, a technique a Pony explained had been adapted from both traditional Lakota structures and European straw bale building methods. More efficient than what you had before, a Pony said, her fingers deftly packing the mixture into wooden frames. Holds heat in winter, keeps cool in summer, breathes with the seasons. I've never seen anything like it, Maeve admitted, mimicking the older woman's movements with less grace but growing confidence. A Pony's eyes crinkled at the corners. Old knowledge meeting new, neither alone is enough. Her gaze drifted toward Daniel, who was consulting with a group of younger builders at the far end of the site. My brother has always understood this, why we survive when others fade. Your brother? Maeve followed her gaze with surprise. Daniel is your brother? Half-brother, a Pony clarified, her hands never pausing in their work. Same father, different mothers. He carries more of the old ways. I walked more in the modern world. Together, balance. She gave Maeve a sidelong glance, like what is happening here. Before Maeve could ask what she meant, a shout went up from the building site. They turned to see the final major support beam being hoisted into place. Small pine bough tied to its peak, a tradition Maeve would later learn that honored the spirit of the tree that had given its life for the structure. As the beam settled into position, secured by Joseph and two other young men perched atop the frame, a spontaneous cheer rose from the gathered workers. A Pony set aside her work and stood, brushing clay from her hands. Come, she said simply, time for blessing. Maeve followed her toward the framework of the house, where people were gathering in a loose circle. Daniel stood at what would become the eastern entrance, his expression solemn yet somehow radiant. Beside him, Maka, the medicine man who had treated Dakota's injury, held a small clay bowl from which thin tendrils of fragrant smoke rose into the air. Dakota appeared at Maeve's side, moving more easily now with his crutch. Smudging ceremony, he explained quietly. Purifies the new structure, honors the directions, invites good spirits to dwell within. Daniel began to speak in Lakota, his deep voice carrying easily through the afternoon air. Though Maeve couldn't understand the words, their resonance, their rhythm, conveyed meaning beyond language. He moved slowly around the perimeter of the structure, Maka following with the smoking bowl, stopping at each cardinal direction to offer words and gestures of reverence. When they completed the circuit, returning to the eastern entrance, Daniel switched to English, his gaze finding Maeve in the crowd. "We ask that this home stand strong against wind and rain, against cold and heat," he intoned. "We ask that those who dwell within know peace, that voices raised here speak with kindness, that hearts gathered here beat with compassion." He extended his hand toward Maeve. "Come forward. This blessing must include the one who will call this place home." A gentle pressure at her back, a pony's hand, urged Maeve forward. She moved through the circle of onlookers, suddenly self-conscious, in the ceremonial stillness that had fallen over the gathering. When she reached Daniel, he took her hand and placed it against one of the support beams. "Feel the strength," he instructed quietly. "Wood that has weathered seasons, grown slowly, rooted deeply. Now it stands for you, as you stood for Dakota." When storm came, Maka offered the smudging bowl, gesturing for her to draw the fragrant smoke toward herself. The scent was complex, sage predominant, but also sweetgrass and something resinous she couldn't identify. It enveloped her senses, momentarily sharpening her awareness of everything around her, the roughness of the wood beneath her palm, the afternoon light gilding the faces of those watching, the sound of prairie wind moving through the tall grass beyond the building site. "Speak your hope for this place," Daniel encouraged. "Words give shape to intention." Maeve hesitated, unaccustomed to such ceremonial speaking, but as she looked around at the faces watching her, open, expectant, without judgment, words rose naturally to her lips. "May this home," she began, her voice gaining strength as she continued, "be a place of shelter not just for me, but for all who need it. May it stand as a reminder that strength comes not from walls alone, but from the hands that built them and the hearts that filled them with purpose." She swallowed, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "May it honor both my ancestors who worked this land and those who walked it long before them. May it be a place of reconciliation, of new beginnings." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. Approval, yes, but also something deeper, more personal. He nodded once, then turned to address the gathered workers. "It is good," he said simply. "Now we continue." The ceremonial atmosphere dissolved as people returned to their tasks with renewed energy. Maka carefully extinguished the smudging herbs, but the scent lingered, mingling with the sharper smells of cut wood and fresh earth that permeated the building site. Maeve found herself drawn into the flow of activity, moving between work groups as needed, learning new skills with each hour that passed. By late afternoon, not only did the frame of the house stand complete, but many of the wall sections were being raised into position, insulated panels like those she and a pony had created, along with more conventional frame and board construction, where structural needs demanded it. The design, Maeve realized as it took shape, was both familiar and new. The footprint followed that of her original farmhouse, honoring its roots, but the layout had been subtly modified to better catch the winter sun, to shelter more effectively against the prevailing winds. Elements she recognized from photographs of traditional Lakota structures were incorporated seamlessly with modern building techniques, not as cultural affectations, but as practical adaptations to the realities of prairie life. As dusk approached, bringing with it the cooling breath of evening, Maeve found herself standing a short distance from the building site, watching the continued work with a sense of wonder that hadn't diminished throughout the day. The structure, that now stood, more than a frame but not yet fully enclosed, already felt more like home than the original house had in years. "They'll work until full dark," a voice observed beside her. Young men showing off their strength, trying to impress the women. Maeve turned to find Wachiwi standing there, her silver-streaked hair catching the last golden rays of sunlight. The older woman's eyes held a knowing humor as she watched the workers, many of whom had indeed removed their shirts in the afternoon heat, muscles gleaming with sweat as they raced to complete another wall section before losing the light. "They've already done more than I could have imagined possible in a single day," Maeve said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay this." Wachiwi made a small dismissive gesture with one hand. "Repayment cheapens gift. Better to honor it by how you live in that house." She gave Maeve a sidelong glance. "Besides, you repay already." "How?" "By working alongside, by accepting help without shame, by treating our ways with respect." Wachiwi's expression softened. "By saving Dakota. That alone would be enough." Maeve shook her head. "I only did what anyone would do." "No," Wachiwi said firmly. "Not anyone. World is full of closed doors, turned backs. You opened your door." Before Maeve could respond, a call went up from the cooking area where the evening meal was being prepared. Wachiwi touched her arm lightly. "Come, eat. Tomorrow is another day of work." The evening meal was even more festive than the previous nights. Stories flowed with the food, laughter punctuated the conversation, and several of the younger men produced instruments, a guitar, a violin, and traditional drums, leading to impromptu music and dancing as the night deepened. Children darted between the adults, playing games that seemed to require minimal equipment but maximum energy, their shrieks of delight carrying into the star-strewn darkness beyond the circle of firelight. Maeve found herself seated between her pony and a young woman she hadn't met before, who introduced herself as Kimmy, Joseph's wife. Their infant son slept peacefully in a beautifully beaded carrier at Kimmy's feet, occasionally stirring but never fully waking despite the noise surrounding him. "He sleeps through anything," Kimmy said proudly when she caught Maeve glancing at the baby. "Joseph says he'll be a great hunter someday, calm in chaos, patient in waiting." "He's beautiful," Maeve said, meaning it. The child's copper skin glowed in the firelight, his tiny features perfectly formed. "How old?" 4 months next week." Kimmy's expression grew more serious. "His birth was difficult, without Maka's knowledge and Daniel's prayers." She left the sentence unfinished, but her hand moved protectively to the carrier. "We named him Akule, gift." Across the fire, Daniel stood to address the gathering, raising his hands for quiet. The music and conversation gradually stilled as all attention turned to him. "Today we have raised the bones of a new home," he began, his voice carrying easily through the night air. "Tomorrow we will give it flesh, walls, roof, protection against elements. Day after, perhaps the heart, hearth, windows, doors that open and close by choice, not force of wind." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. Maeve noticed how complete the attention given to Daniel was, not out of fear or obligation, but genuine respect. Even the children had quieted, sensing the importance of the moment. "But a home is more than wood and stone," Daniel continued. "It is memory, it is legacy, it is promise kept." His gaze found Maeve across the fire. "This land has known many homes, Lakota winter camps, settlers' cabins, the house that storm took. Each holds stories, each leaves marks upon the earth." He paused, his expression growing more introspective. "When I was a young man, full of anger at what had been taken from our people, I thought separation was the only way. Keep to reservation, keep to old ways, build walls against change." A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "I was wrong." The admission clearly surprised some of the younger people present, though the elders nodded in understanding. Daniel continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "Strength comes not from walls, but from bridges. Not from holding tight to past, but from carrying its wisdom into future. He gestured toward the partially constructed house. This building, it is such a bridge. Your hands, he swept his arm to include all the workers. Lakota hands. Building, on ground once walked by our ancestors, creating home for this woman who opened her door when needed. This is how healing happens. Not in grand gestures by governments, not in treaties written and broken, but in small daily acts of humanity. The silence that followed his words was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Then, from the edge of the circle, Dakota spoke. "Grandfather," he said, his young voice steady, "tell the story of the broken spear." Daniel's expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and approval. "You think it is time for that story?" Dakota nodded solemnly. "I do." Daniel considered for a moment, then inclined his head in agreement. "Very well." He settled himself more comfortably, assuming the posture of a storyteller, back straight, hands open on his knees, gaze focused on something beyond the immediate circle. "Many winters ago," he began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that immediately captured attention. "When my grandfather's grandfather was a young warrior, there came a time of great hunger for our people. Buffalo were scarce, pushed west by settlers and hunters. Winter was harsh, snow deep, game hidden. The band was camped near what you now call the Little Missouri River, trying to survive until spring. Among them was a warrior named Hawaiian, of the mysterious voice. He was known for his hunting skill, his courage in battle, but also for his quick anger, his unwillingness to forgive even small wrongs. His pride was as vast as the prairie itself. One day, hunting alone, Hawaiian came upon a settler's cabin standing where no cabin had been before. Smoke rose from its chimney, speaking of warmth inside, of food perhaps. Anger filled him. Here was one who took Lakota land, who built walls where buffalo should roam. He notched an arrow, ready to defend what was rightfully his people's. But as he drew back his bow, the cabin door opened. Out stepped not a man with rifle, as he expected, but a woman, heavy with child, her face thin with hunger that matched his own. Behind her, small faces peered from the doorway, children, eyes wide with the same fear Hawaiian had seen in his own people's eyes as hunger gnawed their bellies. His arrow remained notched, his muscles tense to release. One shot, justice for his people, one less Wasiku family to take what was not theirs. The woman saw him then, her eyes finding his across the clearing. She did not run, she did not scream. She simply stood, one hand on her swollen belly, waiting for whatever would come. And in that moment, Hawaiian's arm betrayed him. It would not release the arrow. Something in her eyes, not hatred, not fear, but a tired acceptance, reached him in a place arrows could not penetrate. He lowered his bow. The woman watched him still. Then, slowly, she turned and entered her cabin. Hawaiian should have left then, returned to his people empty-handed as he had begun, but curiosity held him there, hidden at the forest's edge. Minutes passed. The cabin door opened again. The woman emerged, carrying something in her arms. She walked to the center of the clearing, placed the bundle on a stump, then returned to her cabin. When she was gone, Hawaiian approached cautiously, expecting trap or trick. Instead, he found 3 rabbits, freshly caught, and a small pouch of cornmeal, food freely given by one who had little to spare. Shame and confusion warred within him. He took the gift, his people's need too great to refuse, but left in its place his second-best knife, a token of exchange, if not quite equal to what he received. That night, as his people ate the meat and cornmeal stretched thin among many mouths, Hawaiian told no one where the food had come from. His pride would not allow it. But the next day, he found himself drawn back to the settler's cabin, this time bringing 2 prairie chickens he had managed to snare. Another exchange was made. his birds for her dried apples and a piece of salt pork. So it continued through. The worst of winter, never speaking, never acknowledging, but trading what each could spare to help the other survive. When spring finally came, Hawakan's band prepared to move on, following game as it returned to the plains. On his final visit to the clearing, Hawakan found not food waiting on the stump, but his knife, the one he had left that first day. Beside it lay a tiny carved wooden horse, clearly made by a child's unpracticed hand. And Hawakan, warrior of the Lakota, feared in battle, unbending in pride, did something he had never done before. He wept, not from sadness, but from recognition of something he had denied too long, that humanity exists beyond boundaries of tribe or race, that survival sometimes depends not on strength of arm, but on strength of heart. He left on the stump his most prized possession, his hunting spear deliberately broken in half. One half he took with him, the other he left behind. A broken weapon, no longer meant for war, but a symbol of something else, a bridge between worlds. Years later, when Hawakan was an old man and I just a boy, he showed me his half of that spear, kept wrapped in soft hide all those years. I never knew their names, he told me, never spoke a word to them. But they saved our people that winter, as surely as if they had been Lakota. Remember this when your heart fills with anger at the Wasiku. Judge each by their actions, not by the actions of all who look like them. Daniel's voice softened, becoming more reflective. Hawakan was my great-grandfather. His half of that broken spear was buried with him when he walked on to the spirit world. The other half, who knows? Perhaps lost to time, perhaps still treasured by descendants of that settler family, people who never knew its story or its meaning. He looked directly at Maeve, his gaze intense. Until bridges are built, both sides stand apart, seeing only distance between them, not the possibility of crossing. Sometimes it takes a storm to wash away old structures, old thinking. Sometimes it takes a child in need to open a door long closed. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the occasional pop of the fire and the distant calling of night creatures. Maeve found herself deeply moved, not just by the story itself, but by what it represented. Daniel sharing something precious from his culture, a teaching story that contained both history and hope. Dakota, who had requested the telling, nodded solemnly from his place in the circle. His eyes, when they met Maeve's across the fire, held a wisdom beyond his years, as if he understood something about bridges and broken spears that adults had yet to fully grasp. Gradually, conversation resumed around the fires, though in a more subdued tone. The musicians returned to their instruments, but the melodies they played were gentler now, reflective rather than celebratory. People began to drift away to their sleeping areas, the day's labor and the evening's emotional resonance taking their toll. Maeve found herself approached by Joseph as she prepared to seek her own rest. He carried something wrapped in cloth, his expression uncharacteristically serious for one normally so quick to smile. "I wanted to give you this," he said, offering the bundle. "It's from all of us, but especially from Kimmy and me." Curious, Maeve unwrapped the cloth to find a door knocker made from polished antler and copper, beautifully crafted with geometric designs etched into its surface. "For your new house," Joseph explained. Traditional Lakota homes didn't have doors that needed knocking, of course. But we thought, a new tradition, maybe. Something that honors both worlds. Maeve ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the antler, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful," she managed finally. "I'll treasure it." Joseph nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Good dreams, Maeve," he said, the phrase obviously a customary nighttime farewell among his people. "Good dreams to you too, Joseph." Vroom, as she settled into her bedroll beneath the buffalo hide that had become her nightly comfort, Maeve found her thoughts returning to Daniel's story of the broken spear. Something about it resonated deeply within her, perhaps because she too had stood alone after loss, had built walls rather than bridges, in her determination to need no one. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind too full of new impressions, new understandings. When dreams finally claimed her, they were vivid, images of hands building, of doors opening, of spears transformed into support beams for structures that sheltered all who entered. She woke with the dawn, the remnants of those dreams still clinging to her consciousness as she emerged from her shelter. The camp was already stirring, breakfast fires being kindled, children being roused from sleep, workers preparing for another day of building. The framework of her new home stood silhouetted against the pink-gold eastern sky, more substantial than it had appeared the previous evening, yet still open to possibility. Wachiwi appeared at her side, offering a steaming cup of coffee prepared exactly as Maeve preferred it, a detail the older woman had somehow noticed and remembered. "Sleep well?" she asked, her keen eyes missing nothing of Maeve's slightly disheveled appearance. "Dreams," Maeve replied simply. "Many dreams." Wachiwi nodded as if this explained everything. "Good. Dreams prepare the way for what comes next." She gestured toward the building site where Daniel stood in conversation with several of the work leaders. "Today, the walls rise fully. By nightfall, you will see your home as it will be." As Maeve sipped her coffee, watching the camp move through its morning rituals, she was struck by how quickly she had adapted to this communal life. Just 3 days ago, she had been utterly alone, facing the destruction of everything she owned with nothing but her own resources to draw upon. Now she stood surrounded by people who had, through some alchemy of circumstance and choice, become, if not family, then something very close to it. The day's work began in earnest as soon as breakfast was cleared away. The rhythm established, the previous day continued. Teams focused on specific tasks, materials flowing where needed, progress visible with each passing hour. Maeve found herself working primarily with the women today, preparing the interior elements that would transform the structure from shelter to home. Under Wachiwi's direction, they sorted through the salvaged items from Maeve's original house, furniture that could be repaired, textiles that could be cleaned, kitchenware that had survived the tornado's fury. What could not be saved was respectfully set aside, with Wachiwi promising that nothing would be wasted. Wood repurposed, metal melted down, fabric cut and rewoven into new forms. "Everything has its cycle," she explained as they worked. "End of one purpose becomes beginning of another." By midday, the exterior walls of the house were fully raised, the structure now clearly defined against the prairie backdrop. Workers swarmed over the roof, laying beams that would support the cedar shingles already being split by a team of craftsmen nearby. The shape of the building was both familiar and new, the basic footprint of Maeve's original farmhouse, but with modifications that spoke of Lakota design influences. The most striking difference was the addition of a circular great room at the heart of the house, its ceiling higher than the surrounding spaces, its walls curving in a way that reminded Maeve of images she had seen of traditional teepees. This central space connected to the more conventional rooms, kitchen, bedrooms, bath, but provided a gathering place unlike anything in the original structure. "It's amazing," Maeve said to Daniel when he joined her during the midday break, both of them taking a moment to study the emerging building. "I never imagined anything like this." "Balance," Daniel replied, gesturing toward the marriage of forms. "Square corners of Wasikyu building tradition, circle of Lakota understanding. Both have wisdom, both have purpose." His eyes, when they met hers, held a question. "It pleases you?" "More than I can express," Maeve answered honestly. "It feels right, like it belongs here in a way the old house never quite did." Something in Daniel's expression relaxed at her words. Good. Home should speak to land beneath it, sky above it. He pointed toward the central circular space. That room, it faces cardinal directions, catches light as sun moves. Morning light from east, evening light from west. Season changes, light changes, but always connected to natural rhythms. Maeve nodded, understanding the intention behind the design. A place for gathering, for community. Yes, Daniel agreed, for family, for friends. He hesitated, then added quietly, for bridging worlds, perhaps. Before Maeve could ask what he meant, they were interrupted by Dakota, who approached with growing confidence, his injured leg clearly healing well under Maka's care. "Grandfather," he said, his voice carrying a note of excitement. "The roof beams are ready for blessing." Daniel straightened, his demeanor shifting into the more formal aspect he assumed during ceremonial moments. "I will come." He glanced at Maeve. "You too. Important you participate." The blessing of the roof beams was simpler than the previous day's ceremony, but no less meaningful. As each major support was raised into position, Maka touched it, with sage smoke, while Daniel spoke words in Lakota that Maeve understood were prayers for protection, for shelter against storms both physical and spiritual. When the final beam was secured, completing the basic structure of the roof, Daniel called Maeve forward to place her hands on the central post. "This is the heart of the shelter," he explained. "From here, all strength flows. Your touch, your intention becomes part of that strength." Maeve placed her palms against the rough wood, feeling its solidity, its promise of protection. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel gratitude, not just for the structure itself, but for the hands that had raised it, the community that had made it possible, the unexpected turn of fate that had brought Dakota to her door, and, through him, all of these people into her life. When she opened her eyes, she found Daniel watching her with an expression that seemed to contain equal parts approval and something deeper, more personal, almost a recognition, as if he saw in her someone he had known before. "Good," he said, simply. "Now we continue." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. By late afternoon, not only was the roof structure complete, but many of the cedar shingles had been laid in place. The exterior walls had been finished with a combination of traditional siding and the straw-clay insulation panels Maeve had helped create. Windows, salvaged from the original house where possible, newly constructed where necessary, were being installed, their placement carefully designed to maximize natural light and capture heat in winter. As dusk approached, Maeve found herself working alongside Mika, installing shelving in what would become her new kitchen. The young woman had proved to be not only knowledgeable about book conservation, but skilled in woodworking as well, her hands sure as she measured and cut with precision. "You have a gift for this," Maeve observed, holding a shelf level while Mika secured it. The younger woman smiled, a quick flash of teeth. "My father was a carpenter. I grew up with the smell of sawdust, the sound of his tools." A shadow passed across her face. "He walked on 5 winters ago, but his hands guide mine still." The maples beyond the creek line had begun to hint at autumn, their green edges tinged with gold, when Maeve stepped back to truly see what had been accomplished. 4 days. Just 4 days since the tornado had torn through her life, leaving devastation in its wake. 4 days since Dakota had appeared on her doorstep, injured and alone. 4 days since 70 Lakota riders had emerged from the western horizon at sunset, changing everything. The new house stood complete, not merely a shelter hastily constructed to replace what was lost, but a home reimagined, its very design a conversation between cultures. The exterior combined traditional farmhouse elements with subtle Lakota influences. a roofline that evoked prairie horizons, an eastern entrance positioned to welcome the rising sun, natural materials that seemed to grow from the land itself, rather than being imposed upon it. Different than before, Daniel observed, coming to stand beside her, but still yours. More mine than the old house ever was, Maeve replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. That was my grandmother's home that I happened to live in. This... She gestured toward the structure, searching for words to express what she felt. This feels like it was built for me, not just by circumstance, but by design. Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. Good home listens to its dweller, speaks to their spirit. He pointed toward the circular great room at the heart of the house, visible through the newly installed windows. That space, it waits for your voice, your memories to fill it. Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The central, gathering space that had intrigued Maeve from the early stages of construction now stood finished, its ceiling open to exposed beams arranged in a pattern that reminded her of the spokes of a wheel, its floor a mosaic of salvaged wood from the original house inlaid with new pine in a design that subtly referenced traditional Lakota symbols. Windows placed to catch light throughout the day illuminated the space without need for artificial lighting, and a central hearth, not merely a fireplace, but a true hearth designed for both warmth and cooking, anchored the room both physically and spiritually. Around the perimeter, the more conventional spaces of kitchen, bedrooms, and bathrooms had been arranged with careful attention to flow and function. Most remarkable of all was how much of Maeve's original home had been incorporated into the new structure. Furniture that had seemed beyond repair had been restored with careful craftsmanship. Textiles that had been sodden with rain were now clean and mended, transformed in some cases into new forms, a damaged quilt becoming wall hangings, tattered curtains reborn as cushion covers. Even her grandmother's broken teapot had been mended as Wachui had promised, its cracks filled with a mixture that mimicked the gold of Japanese kintsugi, transforming damage into beauty. "We finished today," Daniel said, breaking into her thoughts. "Tonight, home blessing. Tomorrow we return to reservation." Maeve felt an unexpected pang at his words. The prospect of their departure, of returning to her solitary existence after these days of community, struck her with surprising force. "So soon?" Something in Daniel's expression softened. "Winter camp calls us. Preparations must be made before snow flies." He hesitated, then added, "But distance need not mean separation. Not anymore." Before Maeve could ask what he meant, Dakota approached, moving now with only the slightest hint of a limp. The boy who had arrived at her door, pale and injured, was transformed, his copper skin glowing with health, his dark eyes bright with purpose. "Everything is ready for the ceremony," he reported to his grandfather, then turned to Maeve with a smile that still held traces of shyness. "You should see inside. We've brought all your things in." The final day of work had been focused on the interior, installing cabinets and fixtures, arranging furniture, transforming the structure into a truly livable space. Maeve had been deliberately kept away from the house for the afternoon, occupied with helping prepare the evening feast, while a team of workers led by Wachui completed the finishing touches. Now, as she stepped through the eastern entrance, Maeve found herself speechless. The house welcomed her with a warmth that went beyond the physical, a sense of belonging, of rightness, that she had never felt in the old farmhouse despite her years of living there. Afternoon light streamed through the carefully placed windows, illuminating spaces that somehow managed to be both entirely new and hauntingly familiar. "Come," Dakota urged, taking her hand with a casualness that spoke volumes about the trust that had developed between them. "See everything." He led her through the house, pointing out features with unabashed pride in his people's craftsmanship. The kitchen, though smaller than the original, was designed with such efficiency that it actually offered more usable space. Her books, so many more saved than she had dared hope, filled shelves built into the walls, their spines a colorful tapestry of memory. The bedrooms were arranged to catch morning light, their furnishings a blend of salvaged pieces and new construction, each space feeling both protective and expansive. Even the bathroom, often an afterthought in old farmhouses, had been reimagined with attention to both function and beauty. A deep tub positioned beneath a window that framed the western sky. A vanity crafted from a dresser that had been in Maeve's family for generations. But it was the central gathering space that took her breath away. Here, the heart of the new home revealed itself fully. The circular room, with its wheel-patterned ceiling and meaningful floor design, created a sense of being simultaneously sheltered and connected to something larger. The hearth at its center was laid ready for its first fire, the stone chimney rising through the roof like a spine. Around the hearth, cushions and low benches had been arranged for seating, their covers made from a combination of Maeve's salvaged fabrics and new textiles with subtle Lakota designs. The walls held shelves displaying objects that told the story of her life, her grandmother's collection of blown glass, her own ceramic pieces, photographs in frames crafted from reclaimed wood. And on the eastern wall, illuminated by the late afternoon sun, hung something entirely new, a woven tapestry depicting a storm, a farmhouse, a boy, and a woman with copper hair opening her door. The artistry was exquisite, the symbolism unmistakable. "Watchie, we made it," Dakota said, following her gaze. "Started the night we arrived, worked on it every evening after others slept." Maeve's throat tightened with emotion. "It's perfect." They completed the tour in the kitchen, where Watchie waited with quiet dignity, her hands folded before her. The older woman's eyes held a question as Maeve entered. Seeking approval, Maeve realized with surprise, as if this master craftswoman, this elder of her people, valued Maeve's opinion of her work. "Watchie," Maeve said, struggling to find words adequate to her feelings. "You've created not just a house, but a home. I can never thank you enough." Something in the older woman's posture relaxed. "Home is meant for living, not for thanks. You honor our work by how you dwell within these walls." She gestured toward the central hearth, visible through the kitchen doorway. "First fire will be lit tonight. Special moment, new beginning." Outside, the camp was transforming as well. The temporary shelters that had housed the workers were being dismantled, supplies packed onto horses and into the few vehicles that had accompanied the group. The cooking area, however, remained in full operation, with preparations for the evening feast well underway. Children darted between adults, simultaneously helping and hindering, their energy undiminished after days of work. Maeve found herself drawn into the feast preparations, working alongside women who had become friends in the span of a few intense days. They showed her techniques for preparing traditional dishes: wajapi, a rich berry pudding; taniga, a hearty soup made with tripe; and vegetables, fry bread whose recipe varied slightly from family to family, each woman claiming hers the authentic version. As they worked, they shared stories of childhood spent between reservation and mainstream American culture, of grandmothers who had held ancient knowledge, of hopes for children growing up in a world that was simultaneously more accepting and more challenging than the one they had known. Maeve listened, occasionally offering stories of her own, aware of the privilege of being included in this intimate exchange. Ebony, Daniel's sister, worked nearby, her strong hands deftly shaping dough for fry bread. "You will come visit reservation," she said, not a question but a statement of certainty. "See our ways, not just in work, but in daily life." "I'd like that," Maeve replied, meaning it. The prospect of maintaining these newfound connections eased the ache of their imminent departure. "Good." Aponi nodded decisively. "Wachiwi says you have gift for weaving. Could teach our young ones your techniques. Learn ours in exchange. See, the idea of having something to offer, some skill to share rather than simply being the recipient of help, appealed to Maeve deeply. I'd be honored." As dusk approached, the final preparations for the home blessing ceremony began. Maeve was led away by Wachiwi and Kimi, who presented her with clothing for the occasion. Not the green dress she had worn during construction, but something new. The simple dress of soft buckskin had been decorated with subtle beadwork at collar and the design incorporating both traditional Lakota motifs and elements that Maeve recognized from her grandmother's quilting patterns. "For you," Wachiwi said, her expression betraying unusual shyness, "to remember." "It's beautiful," Maeve breathed, touching the intricate beadwork with gentle fingers. "But when did you have time?" "Women worked in shifts," Kimi explained, her young face alight with pride in their collective accomplishment. "Many hands make light work." "I can't possibly accept—" "Already yours," Wachiwi interrupted firmly. "Refusing gift refuses giver." Put that way, Maeve could only nod acceptance. She changed into the dress, marveling at how perfectly it fit, how the soft buckskin moved with her body as if it had been made for her, which, of course, it had. Kimi helped arrange her copper hair, weaving small decorative beads into the braids that framed her face. When they emerged, the camp had been transformed. Torches illuminated the central area, and the remaining camp fixtures had been arranged in a circle around a newly built fire pit positioned between the house and what had been the main cooking area. People had changed into their own ceremonial clothing, not elaborate powwow regalia, but special garments clearly reserved for significant occasions. Daniel stood waiting, his tall figure commanding even in the simple ribbon shirt and leggings he wore. His hair, usually confined in a single braid, had been arranged in 2 braids decorated with beads and a single eagle feather. Beside him stood Maka, the medicine man, holding a bundle wrapped in red cloth. As Maeve approached, a hush fell over the gathered community. Daniel's eyes widened slightly at her appearance, then crinkled at the corners in what she had come to recognize as his version of a smile. "You honor us by wearing our ways," he said simply. "The honor is mine," Maeve replied, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Daniel gestured toward the house, its windows glowing with lamplight against the gathering darkness. "Now we bless your home. Invite good spirits to dwell within, ask protection against harm." He held out his hand. "Come, you must lead us over threshold." The ceremony began with a procession around the exterior of the house, led by Maka and Daniel, with Maeve following immediately behind them. The entire community joined the circuit, moving sunwise around the building, while Maka sang in Lakota, his voice rising and falling in a melody that seemed ancient as the hills themselves. At each cardinal direction, they paused while Daniel spoke words of blessing, different at each point, acknowledging the unique qualities associated with East, beginnings, illumination, South, growth, passion, West, introspection, maturity, and North, wisdom, endurance. At each stop, Maka burned different herbs in his clay bowl, the changing scents marking their progress around the house. When they completed the circuit, returning to the eastern entrance, Daniel turned to address the gathered community. "Home is more than walls and roof," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the evening air. "It is vessel for memories, container for dreams, shelter for heart as much as body. This home, built by many hands from many traditions, stands as reminder that what divides us is less important than what connects us." He gestured for Maeve to step forward, positioning her at the threshold of the eastern door. You, who opened, your door to one in need, now enter your own door, as first act in new home. What you carry in your heart crosses threshold with you. Choose wisely what you bring inside these walls. Maeve stood for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. What would she carry into this new beginning? The grief of past losses, the bitterness of her failed marriage, the isolation she had wrapped around herself like armor, or something else, the lesson of these remarkable days, the possibility that strength came not from independence, but from connection. Taking a deep breath, she stepped across the threshold. The interior of the house welcomed her, the scent of new wood and fresh textiles mingling with the herbals used in the blessing. Daniel and Maka followed, then Dakota, then the rest of the community filing in behind them until the central gathering space was filled with people. Maka moved to the hearth, where kindling and logs had been arranged for the first fire. From his bundle, he produced a small container of what appeared to be tinder, placing it carefully among the kindling. Then, to Maeve's surprise, he turned and beckoned to her. First fire in new home should be lit by one who dwells there, Daniel explained quietly. Creates connection between dweller and dwelling that remains as long as home stands. Maka offered Maeve a striker, a simple tool of flint and steel. She took it with hands that trembled slightly, aware of the significance of the moment. Kneeling beside the hearth, she struck the flint against steel, creating sparks that caught in the tinder. A thin wisp of smoke rose, then a small flame that she gently encouraged with her breath until it licked at the kindling surrounding it. As the fire caught and grew, spreading to the larger logs, a murmur of approval went through the gathered community. The hearth, lit for the first time, cast a warm glow throughout the circular room, illuminating faces that had become dear too. Maeve, in the span of just a few days, Daniel spoke again, this time in Lakota. His words clearly a prayer or blessing from the reverent tone and the way heads bowed around the room. When he finished, he switched to English, addressing Maeve directly. Fire is life, he said. Brings light to darkness, warmth to cold, transforms raw to cooked, danger to safety. This first fire in your hearth connects you to all fires that have burned since humans first tamed flame. He gestured around the room. These witnesses share this moment, become part of your home's story, as you have become part of theirs. Maeve felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. The simple truth of his words, the profound connection being acknowledged, moved her beyond her capacity to respond. Sensing her emotion, Daniel continued, giving her time to compose herself. Now we feast, celebrate work completed, honor new beginning. He turned to the gathered community, raising his voice slightly. But first, final gift. At his signal, Joseph and two other young men left the room, returning moments later, carrying something large wrapped in a blanket. They set it carefully near the hearth, then stepped back, looking to Daniel for direction. When new home is built, Daniel explained, traditional gift is something to fill it with meaning. He gestured toward the wrapped object. This is from all of us, but especially from Dakota, who first dreamed of you. Dakota stepped forward, his young face solemn with the importance of the moment. You saved my life, he said simply. Opened your door when storm came. This is small, thanks for great kindness. At his nod, Joseph and the others carefully removed the blanket covering the object, revealing a rocking chair of remarkable craftsmanship. Made from a combination of salvaged wood from Maeve's original furniture and new hardwood, it combined traditional Western furniture design with Lakota decorative elements, geometric patterns carved into the arms and headrest, subtle beadwork inlaid along the edges. For telling stories, Dakota explained, his voice carrying a hint of shyness. For watching sunsets, for growing old in peace. Maeve stared at the chair, overwhelmed by its beauty and the meaning behind it. "Dakota," she managed finally. "It's exquisite. But how? When did you have time?" The boy smiled, glancing at his grandfather. "Many hands, remember? Grandfather designed, Joseph and others built, grandmother added beadwork. A community effort," Daniel confirmed, "like the house itself." Maeve ran her hand over the smooth wood of the armrest, feeling the hours of careful work that had gone into its creation. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Wachiwi advised, from nearby, echoing her husband's words from days earlier. "Sit, feel if it holds you right." Amidst encouraging nods, Maeve settled into the chair. It seemed to welcome her, the curve of its back supporting her perfectly, the motion of its rocker smooth and gentle. She pushed slightly with her feet, setting it in motion, and felt a sense of rightness wash over her. "It's perfect," she said simply. Approval rippled through the gathered witnesses. Daniel nodded once, satisfied, then turned to address the community. "Now we feast, celebrate good work completed, new friendship begun." The feast that followed was unlike anything Maeve had experienced. Not merely a meal, but a celebration that combined elements of ceremony, community gathering, and pure, joyful revelry. Food was shared with generous abundance. Stories flowed as freely as the coffee and tea, and eventually music filled the new home as several people produced instruments, drums, flutes, even a guitar that had somehow appeared among the supplies. Children played in the expanding and contracting spaces between adults, their energy undiminished despite the lateness of the hour. Dogs that had accompanied the group from the reservation lounged contentedly near the hearth or positioned themselves, optimistically near anyone eating, their presence adding to the sense of domestic completeness. As the evening progressed, Maeve found herself seated in her new rocking chair, positioned near enough to the hearth to benefit from its warmth without overheating. The chair already felt like an old friend, its embrace both supportive and yielding as she rocked gently in time with the music. Wachiwi appeared beside her, lowering herself onto a nearby cushion with the careful movements of age. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, watching the celebration unfold around them. "Good home," Wachiwi said finally, her gaze taking in the room filled with light and life, strong bones, good heart. "Thanks to all of you," Maeve replied. "I still can't believe how much has been accomplished in such a short time." Many hands. Wachiwi shrugged as if the feat were unremarkable, but also good purpose, makes work lighter. She studied Maeve with eyes that missed nothing. "You will be alone again tomorrow. Ready?" The directness of the question took Maeve by surprise, but she found herself appreciating the older woman's straightforwardness. "I don't know," she admitted. "These days with all of you, they've changed something in me. The thought of returning to silence, to solitude." She let the sentence trail off, unsure how to express the complex emotions welling within her. Wachiwi nodded, understanding. "Hard to go back to old ways once heart has tasted community." She reached out, her work-worn hand covering Maeve's. "But you are not same woman Tornado found. Stronger now, connected. Solitude need not mean isolation." "But what does that mean practically?" "You'll all be gone tomorrow." "Gone from sight, not from reach," Wachiwi corrected. "Reservation not so far. Roads work both directions." A hint of humor crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Besides, Dakota has vision of you. Such things not easily ignored." Before Maeve could ask what she meant, Daniel appeared, lowering himself onto a cushion on Maeve's other side. Despite the late hour and days of hard work, he showed no signs of fatigue, his posture as straight as ever, his eyes clear and alert. "My wife speaks of Dakota's vision," he asked, having clearly overheard their conversation. Wachiwi nodded. "Maeve fears return to isolation. Needs to understand what has begun here does not end tomorrow." Daniel considered this. his gaze moving. Around the room, taking in the celebration, his people and Maeve's home intertwined in a way that would have seemed impossible just days ago. "What has begun here," he said finally, "is like seed planted. How it grows depends on tending, on conditions, on choices made after planting." "But what is it?" Maeve pressed, needing clearer understanding. "What exactly has begun?" "Healing," Daniel said simply. "For you, for us, for land itself. Old wounds beginning to close, new growth becoming possible." His eyes, when they met hers, held both wisdom and a hint of challenge. "Question is, will you nurture this beginning or let it wither?" Maeve felt the weight of his words, the responsibility they placed upon her. "I want to nurture it," she said slowly, "but I'm not sure how." "Start simple," Wachui suggested pragmatically. "Visit reservation when invited. Share meals, share stories. Teach what you know, learn what you don't. Rest follows naturally." "There is winter camp soon," Daniel added. "Traditional gathering before cold season fully sets in. You would be welcome." The invitation, so casually extended yet so meaningful in its implications, touched Maeve deeply. "I would be honored," she said, meaning it. The prospect of maintaining connection with these people who had entered her life so unexpectedly lightened the heaviness she had been feeling at the thought of their departure. Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Good. Dakota will be pleased. Boy has become quite attached." His expression softened. "He lost parents young. Sees something in you that speaks to that empty place." The revelation of Dakota's loss, though Maeve had gathered hints of it over the past days, still struck her with unexpected force. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About his parents, I mean." "Car accident," Wachui confirmed, her own expression shadowing with remembered grief. 3 winters passed. Good people, both of them, left 4 children, Dakota youngest. The others? Girls, all 3. Oldest already married with child of her own. 2 middle ones in university. 1 studies medicine, 1 law. Pride warmed Wachiwi's voice. Strong women like their mother, but Dakota, he carries special weight. Only son, keeper of certain traditions. That's why the vision quest was so important, Maeve realized. It wasn't just a spiritual exercise, but a cultural responsibility. Daniel nodded, approval in his eyes at her understanding. Yes, boy becoming man must seek guidance from spirits, from ancestors. Dakota's vision, woman with hair like autumn leaves sheltering him from storm, it came 3 nights in succession, could not be ignored. "So you sent him out deliberately, during tornado season?" Maeve couldn't keep the note of incredulity from her voice. "Not deliberately into danger?" Daniel clarified, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "Vision quest has protections, precautions, watchers who stay. At distance, ready to intervene if truly needed." Storm came faster than expected, separated Dakota from watchers. His expression grew more introspective. Or perhaps spirits arranged matters according to their own wisdom. Wachui made a small sound that might have been amusement. "My husband sees spiritual purpose in hindsight," she said to Maeve. "Truth is, we were worried sick when Storm came and boy was missing. Organized search immediately." Her eyes held Maeve's, but vision proved true nonetheless. "You were where he needed you to be." Maeve found herself wondering at the strange convergence of circumstance and intention, skepticism and belief that had brought them all to this moment. Whatever forces had been at work, divine guidance or mere chance, the outcome was undeniable. A boy had been saved, a home rebuilt, and connections forged that might never have existed otherwise. "I'm glad," she said finally. "However it happened, I'm glad Dakota found his way to my door." Daniel's expression softened into what Maeve had come to recognize as his version of a smile. "As are we all." The evening continued. the celebration gradually winding down as exhaustion from days of hard work began to claim even the most energetic participants. Children fell asleep where they sat, carried off to bed by parents or older siblings. The music quieted, giving way to softer conversations, more intimate exchanges. Eventually, only a handful of people remained awake in the central gathering space. Daniel and Wachiwi, Dakota, fighting sleep, but determined to see the night through. Joseph and Kimmy with their infant son, and Maeve herself, still rocking gently in her new chair, reluctant to see this remarkable day end. "Tomorrow we leave," Daniel said, breaking a comfortable silence that had fallen over the small group. "But first, one more ceremony at dawn. Small, just family." His eyes, when they met Maeve's, held meaning she couldn't quite decipher. "You are included, of course." "What kind of ceremony?" Maeve asked, curious. "Naming," Wachiwi replied. "For you." Maeve blinked in surprise. "For me, but I already have a name." "Wasiku name," Daniel clarified. "Tomorrow, you receive Lakota name. Special honor not given lightly." The significance of such a gesture wasn't lost on Maeve. "I'm deeply honored," she said. "But why me? Surely there are more deserving recipients." "Not matter of deserving," Daniel said, shaking his head slightly. "Matter of recognition. Name already exists, waiting to be spoken. Ceremony simply acknowledges what already is." Before Maeve could ask what he meant, Dakota stirred from where he had been dozing against his grandmother's shoulder. "Like my name," he murmured sleepily. "Dakota, friend to all." Grandfather saw it in me before I could walk. "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "Names have power, carry purpose. Right name helps its bearer walk true path." Maeve found herself both touched and slightly overwhelmed by the intimacy of the gesture, the incorporation into their culture it represented. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to find more adequate words. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting the room in soft shadow and gentle warmth. Outside, the night was clear, stars visible through the skylights Daniel had insisted on including in the design of the central room. "For remembering our place in creation," he had explained, when Maeve questioned the practicality of openings, in the winter roof. Now, gazing up at those stars while surrounded by people who had become inexplicably dear to her in the span of just a few days, Maeve felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had not experienced since childhood. The house around them, her house, her home, seemed to hold them all in a protective embrace, its very structure a testament to the possibility of bridging worlds, of healing old divisions. "Time for rest," Wachiwi announced, rising with the careful movements of age. "Dawn comes early. Ceremony requires clear minds, open hearts." As the small group dispersed to their sleeping areas, the last night they would spend in the camp before returning to the reservation, Maeve found herself standing alone in the central room of her new home. The fire had been banked to last through the night, its glow casting soft light across the carefully crafted space. She moved slowly around the perimeter, running her fingers over surfaces that held the imprint of so many hands. The smooth wood of shelving built by Joseph, the intricate beadwork Wachiwi had incorporated into cushions and wall hangings, the perfectly fitted cabinets Mika had constructed. Every element spoke of care, of connection, of a community that had come together not just to rebuild a house, but to welcome her into something larger than herself. Pausing by the eastern window, Maeve gazed out at the camp that would disperse. With tomorrow's departure, the ache of anticipated loss was real, but so was the promise of continued connection. "Not goodbye," she murmured to herself, "just until next time." And with that thought warming her heart, she sought her own rest, eager for the dawn and whatever ceremony it would bring. Dawn arrived with gentle insistence, pale golden light filtering through the eastern windows of Maeve's new home. She woke to the soft sounds of early morning activity, quiet voices, the crackle of rekindled fires, the distant nickering of horses being prepared for the journey ahead. For a moment, she lay still, absorbing the reality of where she was, in a house that hadn't existed 5 days ago, surrounded by people who had been strangers less than a week before, about to participate in a ceremony she couldn't have imagined in her most fanciful dreams. The buckskin dress she had worn the previous evening had been carefully laid across a chair near her bed, not the green one she had been given initially, but something new. This garment was simpler, unadorned, save for subtle quill work at the neckline, clearly meant for ceremonial rather than decorative purposes. Beside it lay a note in Wachiwi's elegant handwriting, "For new beginnings. Wear with open heart." Maeve dressed quickly, running a brush through her copper hair before braiding it in the simple style Kimmy had shown her. The dress fit perfectly, the soft buckskin moving with her body as if it had always belonged there. She felt both strange and oddly comfortable, as if stepping into a role she hadn't known was waiting for her. Outside, the camp was already half dismantled, supplies packed and loaded, shelters taken down and folded away. Only the central cooking area remained fully functional, where breakfast was being prepared for the community's final meal together. Children darted between adults, somehow managing to help and play simultaneously, their energy undiminished by the early hour or the prospect of the journey ahead. Dakota spotted her first, his face brightening as he hurried over, moving with barely a trace of the limp that had marked his injury. "You're awake. Grandfather was about to send me to find you." "I wouldn't have missed this morning for anything," Maeve assured him, noting how the boy seemed simultaneously excited and solemn, aware of the significance of what was to come. He led her toward a small clearing just beyond the main camp, where Daniel, Wachiwi, Maka, and a handful of others, those Maeve had come to recognize as family and close friends, had gathered in a loose circle. In the center, a small fire burned, sending tendrils of fragrant smoke into the dawn air. Daniel looked up as she approached, his expression softening at the sight of her in the ceremonial dress. "Good," he said simply. "We begin." The naming. The ceremony was both simpler and more profound than Maeve had expected. No elaborate ritual, no complex recitations, just the quiet power of words spoken with intention, witnessed by those whose presence mattered most. Daniel began by explaining in English for Maeve's benefit. "Names have power," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "They shape how we see ourselves, how others see us. Right name is like key that unlocks door to true self." He gestured for Maeve to join him at the center of the circle, positioning her so that she faced east toward the rising sun. Makar approached, carrying the same clay bowl he had used in previous ceremonies. From it, he took a pinch of something that looked like dried herbs, casting it into the small fire. The flames hissed and momentarily flared blue-green, releasing a spicy scent that reminded Maeve of cedar and sage, and something more complex she couldn't identify. Daniel spoke in Lakota then, words that flowed like water over stone, musical and ancient. Though Maeve couldn't understand them, she felt their resonance, their meaning beyond language. When he finished, he placed his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face each direction in turn, south, west, north, speaking different words at each position. Finally, he returned her to face east, where the sun now cleared the horizon, bathing them all in golden light. "In our way," he said, switching back to English, "a person may receive many names throughout life. Each marks passage, growth, change. Name I give you now reflects what we have seen in you, what spirits have shown through your actions." He paused, his gaze holding hers with gentle intensity. From this day, among Lakota people, you will be known as Wikakpiwi, a sun woman. Maeve felt something shift inside her at the sound of the name, a recognition, a rightness she hadn't expected. Wikakpiwi, she repeated, the syllables strange, yet somehow familiar on her tongue. Sun gives life, Daniel explained, brings light to darkness, warmth to cold, opens path for growth, for healing, like you did for Dakota, for all of us in different way. Wachiwi stepped forward then, placing a simple necklace over Maeve's head, a circular pendant of polished antler, etched with a spiral symbol that caught the morning light. To remember, she said simply, your Lakota name, your Lakota family. Family. The word resonated through Maeve like a bell, clear and true. These people, strangers less than a week ago, had indeed become a kind of family, not replacing what she had lost, but adding something new, unexpected, and precious. One by one, those gathered in the circle approached, speaking brief words of acknowledgement, of welcome. Dakota came last, his young face solemn with the importance of the moment. "My vision brought you to us," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "Or brought me to you. Same thing, maybe." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Now you are part of our story, as we are part of yours." The simplicity of the statement, its profound truth, brought tears to Maeve's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." The ceremony concluded as simply as it had begun, the small group dispersing to complete preparations for departure. Breakfast was a communal affair, the last meal they would share for now, filled with conversation about future visits, invitations to the reservation, promises to maintain the connection that had been forged through these extraordinary days. As the meal drew to a close, Daniel stood to address the gathering one final time. "What has happened here," he said, his gaze sweeping across the faces turned toward him, "is more than rebuilding of one home. It is rebuilding of understanding between peoples long separated. Small beginning perhaps, but beginnings matter." He gestured toward Maeve, who sat with Dakota on one side and Wachiwi on the other. "This woman, Wikakpiwi, Sun Woman, opened her door when storm came. Now we have helped open new door for her." His expression grew more serious. "Remember this when you return to reservation, when you hear others speak with bitterness of Waziku, of boundaries that divide us. Remember that bridges can be built, one plank at a time. The departure, when it came, had a ceremonial quality of its own. The 70 riders mounted their horses in precise formation, packs and supplies secured, children settled either on their own ponies or behind parents and grandparents. They arranged themselves in a semicircle facing Maeve's new home, waiting for Daniel's signal. Final farewells were brief but heartfelt. Wachiwi embraced Maeve with surprising strength for one her age, whispering, "Until soon," rather than goodbye. Joseph and Kimmy promised to bring baby Akul for a visit before the first snow. Mika extracted a promise that Maeve would come see the reservation's new cultural center, where her book restoration skills might be put to good use. Dakota's farewell was perhaps the most difficult. The boy who had arrived at her door, injured and wary, was leaving as something close to family. The connection between them forged through shared experience that defied easy categorization. "I'll come back," he promised, his voice thick with suppressed emotion, "with grandfather for winter camp preparations. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "I'll be here," Maeve assured him, her own voice none too steady. "Your vision led you to my door. Once, I suspect it wasn't a one-time event." His smile, quick and bright, was answer enough. Daniel was the last to bid farewell. He took both her hands in his gaze steady and penetrating as always. "Wikakpiwi," he said, using her Lakota name with deliberate emphasis. "Remember, name carries responsibility as well as honor. Sun Woman brings light, shows path, helps growth. He glanced toward her new home, then back to her. This house, it is beginning, not ending. How story continues depends on choices made each day. I understand, Maeve said, meaning it. And I'm grateful, not just for the house, but for everything it represents. The connections, the healing, the new beginning. Something in Daniel's expression softened. Good. Then we leave with clear hearts. He released her hands and stepped back, raising his own in a gesture that was both farewell and blessing. Until we meet again. With a final nod, he mounted his horse and moved to the head of the formation. At his signal, the entire group began to move, forming a line that stretched across the prairie as they turned westward. Children waved enthusiastically. Calls of farewell carried on the morning breeze, and then they were moving away, becoming smaller and smaller against the vast landscape. Maeve stood watching until the last rider disappeared over the western rise, the same direction from which they had first appeared 6 days before. The silence that descended felt not empty, but expectant, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. She turned to face her new home, no longer just a house, but a dwelling infused with meaning, with connection, with purpose, beyond mere shelter. Its lines seemed to welcome her, the eastern entrance, beckoning her forward into whatever this new chapter would bring. Inside, the central hearth still glowed with embers from the first fire, needing only attention to blaze anew. Maeve added kindling, watching as small flames licked upward, catching and growing with each breath of air. The room filled with warm light, illuminating the space that now told a story of two cultures meeting, learning from each other, creating something neither could have achieved alone. Moving to the eastern window, Maeve looked out across the prairie that stretched toward the horizon. The land that had been in her family for generations now felt both more familiar and more mysterious, its history deeper and more complex than she had previously acknowledged. Whatever happened next, she knew she would never see it quite the same way again. The pendant Wachiwi had given her caught the morning light, the spiral design seeming to move with each shift of her body. Sun Woman. The name settled around her. Like a mantle, not a burden, but a calling, an invitation to live into its meaning. In 2 weeks, 3 at most, Dakota would return with his grandfather to prepare for winter camp. Until then, there was much to do. The house needed finishing touches only she could provide, the personal elements that would make it truly her own. The garden, largely destroyed by the tornado, would need replanting with an eye toward spring. And there were neighbors to visit. Her sudden disappearance during the storm surely having caused concern among the scattered farming community. But all that could wait for one more moment. For now, Maeve simply stood in the center of her new home, feeling the presence of all who had contributed to its creation, all who had entered her life through an unexpected knock on her door during a storm. The silence around her felt not like isolation, but like possibility, the pause between one chapter ending and another beginning. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under the September sky, the first hints of autumn touching the tall grass with gold. Somewhere to the west, 70 riders made their way home, carrying the story of what had happened here. And in a clearing not far from where Maeve stood, a small fire had burned down to ash, the words of a naming ceremony still echoing in the air around it. Wikakpi-wi, Sun Woman, a new name for a new beginning. Maeve smiled and turned to face the day ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.